Welcome back. We have about 3 minutes until we start up. But for now, hope you all are doing well. Good to be with you. Just hang in there and we'll get started in a few. Hey, Zachary, good morning. Kylie, hey there. Just a couple minutes. Sebastian, welcome back. With the I don't know, anyone else having these high flex type of class meetings? I'm curious to know how they do it because like people aren't just using their laptops like me, right? There's cameras or something in the classroom that are set up just for that. I don't know at all.
Yeah, like in one of my other classes, like my Spanish class, it's like a smaller classroom, and she just like projects the Zoom meeting on like the projector.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and she just like talks to us and to the camera.
What's recording though?
It's either her computer or like a little camera.
Oh, okay. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but my like acting classes, they have like this little like camera that's like on a stick and they like move it around.
Oh, I see.
Yeah.
Interesting.
It's weird.
That'd be too much for me to learn, so I just have to use this laptop. Hi, McKenna, Olga. Good to see everyone here. Just a few seconds. With the mask on, it keeps fogging up my glasses. It's like hard to teach with the glasses on. Hi, Annabella. Okay, so we're basically now to 10 a.m. Welcome back, everybody. Thanks so much for being here, as usual. Hope you're all having a good week and staying healthy and safe as we get close to the weekend now. So one thing I want to say is that I'm going to mail the essay prompts after class today during the office hours. Just making some last edits to one of the topics. And I'm going to extend the deadline a little bit also so that people have a little more time to work on it. I decided I would like to add a third topic that has to do with the material that we will start on next week. So because of that, and to give you ample time, I thought I would just extend the deadline. So I think I'll maybe move that deadline to the Friday of week 13 instead of the Monday, which would provide you with 4 more days to do the work. And on Monday, when we come back after the weekend, we'll start class with discussion of the prompts. So anyway, just a little heads up. You'll see in the calendar that the original listed due date for Essay 2 was Monday, May 3. And I'm just going to, I think, change it to Friday, May 7. So you'll get a little more time. Other than that, today what we're trying to do is finish up the last couple of pieces of David Lewis's article on the paradoxes of time travel. So I've got some more material on that. It might take up a majority of the class, depending on how it goes. If it does, that's fine, because we have a whole other period set aside for Monday to talk about Descartes' 6 meditation. So if we have to push that beginning to Monday, it's no problem. Anyway, then, let me just get back to the board and bring you back into the topic that we're discussing, which is one more article on time, and that's David Lewis's Paradoxes of Time Travel. As usual, feel free to leave behind a comment at some point just to kind of keep track of your attendance, and obviously keep attending the class itself. You know, don't try to taper off as we reach the critical last few weeks. Okay. So then, here again is our current author and essay, David Lewis, great American philosopher of the 20th century who lived from 1941 until 2001. And this is his 1976 paper, again called The Paradoxes of Time Travel. Okay, so paradoxes of time travel. The goal of his paper is to defend the position that time travel is possible, that it's possible, that it's not logically contradictory or incoherent, that it's something that is weird perhaps, but the weird and strange aspects of it do not necessarily amount to it being impossible. So his goal is, again, it's just to establish that it's possible. And in order to do that, he thinks that he has to kind of dismiss certain claimed paradoxes of time travel, which some people argue make it not seem as though it's possible. So with respect to each different paradox that people might say renders the concept contradictory or impossible, he's out to show that those things do not make it impossible. So the first little puzzle of time travel for him was to define it. And the first thing he says about that is to define time travel, it's basically when there's a discrepancy between two different measurements of time. I tried to show you a little diagram where we imagine a person walking into a cylinder type device. Suppose they walk into this thing at 12:55 p.m. afternoon, according to their watch and all other watches. They go in the machine and they spend what, in their experience, is 5 minutes within the machine. And since the watch is traveling with them, the watch travels exactly in the same way they do. So the watch shows 5 minutes have passed, the one that's on their wrist. But when they get out of the machine, we said that if all the external clocks show that it's now 1 p.m. On the same date, then that wasn't real time travel. If that's the case, then this man walked into a shipping container, stood there for 5 minutes, and then got out. And that's not time travel of any kind of interesting sort. So for it to really be time travel, there has to be a difference between the time shown on his watch and then the time which is shown on all external clocks. So suppose he went 2 hours into the future, then what we would expect is that although he spent 5 minutes relative to himself in the machine, it's a 2-hour gap for everybody that's outside and for all the external clocks. So if he walks out and the other clocks show 3 p.m. and his shows 1, then 5 minutes of his time was 2 hours for everybody else. Now, how can that be the case? How can the same two events be separated by two different measurements of time? Is it 5 minutes that separates departure and arrival from the cylinder? Or is it 2 hours? Well, the author says that there is a way of explaining away this possible assumed paradox. He does that by introducing two different time frames. Now, that's a question for the live chat. Can anybody tell me what were these two different types of time that the author distinguished, which he thinks helps to eliminate this paradox? He said, well, there's actually two different frames, and that's what versus what. Let me know. So yeah, from the last meeting, one of the final points. That's correct, Kylie. Personal and external time. Yes, so let's talk about that again, just to review. Personal time would be the time as experienced and measured by the individual time traveler, as shown on their personal wristwatch, which stays with them. External time would be time as experienced and measured by all external observers and clocks. So now, in reaction to the question, how much time is in between the man getting in and out of the cylinder, we would say it's 5 minutes of personal time, but 2 hours of external time. And that's not theoretically inconceivable at all, because a feature of the theory of relativity and the space-time theory is that objects actually will go through time at different rates depending on their velocity relative to other objects in space. So time dilation, for example, means that when one individual is traveling at a high rate of speed, they're passing through time slower than another person. And in that case, we could say that, like, in personal time, I spent 15 minutes, but in external time, everyone else experienced like a year or 5 years or 5 months. So it's actually not at all physically or scientifically inconceivable that two different measurements of time could exist according to the space-time theory. So he says, actually, this is not a paradox. We can thus explain how it appears to be a discrepancy between the time measurement shown for the individual and for the external clocks. He says this is the distinction between personal and external time also allows us to make sense of statements that would otherwise seem totally confusing and bizarre. Like, take this statement here. Suppose that someone's about to hop into one of these machines, right? And they say, hey, soon I will be in the past. This is a strange looking proposition, soon I will be in the past, because if you just read it, what it appears to say is that soon, meaning like after this, soon is what's going to happen next. I will be backwards in time. So how is that possible? It looks like it would say time's going in opposite directions. Soon in the future, I will be in the past with respect to time. How is that possible to say? Well, by utilizing the distinction between personal and external time, we can make clear sense of this. So suppose that someone was about to jump into the Tesla time machine that Elon Musk is going to bring out later this year or something. And they say, hey, this is cool. In 15 minutes, I'm going to be watching the Beatles back in 1966. How cool is that? It sounds like a contradiction because it sounds as though the person is saying in 15 minutes into the future, I'll be 55 years into the past. But actually, that's not inconceivable given the distinction between personal and external time. So we would say that in 15 minutes of my personal time, I'll be 55 years minus in the external time frame. So one paradox eliminated, or at least set to the side. So on to the next. The next little puzzling scenario of time travel that the author Lewis tries to deal with or grapple with is this question. Suppose that a person goes back into the past in order to have a conversation with their past self. So, like in your case, it's 2021 right now, you're a college student. Suppose that you take the newly developed time machines that, let's assume, will come out this year, and you want to go back to like 2017 to, I don't know, have a little conversation with your freshman year version. Give them some guidance or something about what to expect in the next few years. That would be kind of like, what if maybe I go back into 2010 to my graduate school years and I tell myself, hey, it's going to work out. You'll become a professor, so just keep studying. Anyway, that's one scenario. Imagine a person goes back into the past and places a phone call to their younger self. Now, here's a question. If somebody did have a conversation with their past self, how many people are talking? Is it one? Is it two? What's the number? So here's a new question that gives rise to another possible paradox. If a time traveler talks to themselves in the past, how many people are having this conversation? The reason this is somewhat puzzling or paradoxical is because it appears justifiable to give two possible answers. On the one hand, to all appearances, this looks as though it's two people talking because they're in two separate parts of space. One person is on one end of the phone line, the other person is in a separate place receiving the phone call. So it looks like it's two people, but then there's also some intuitive reasoning behind saying that it's not two, but rather one. So what do you guys say if I was to ask you this? Think in terms of a science fictional scenario. If a person goes into the past, talks to themselves back then, how many people would you say are having this conversation and why? What do you think is the most reasonable answer to that? How many people are on the phone?
Two.
Okay, so.
I want to say one, but then you just said how many people have the phone.
Well, one is a number, so it could be one. A person talking to themselves.
I'd say one.
Okay, you take it back and say one. One student says that it could be one person having the conversation. I noticed that there's not a ton of people jumping up into the chat. Come on, guys, get active. What do you think? Is it one or is it two or what? Why? Okay, Kylie, you say one person is having the conversation, but they are two different points in life. There you go. That's actually quite good. And Cordy, let me, I guess, sort of reject your statement. You say two because there are two spatial parts, but there are more than, there's two spatial parts right here, right hand and left hand, but I'm one person. So that's not necessarily an issue. We all have multiple spatial parts. Why would it be best to say that it's one person? What's the difference between this conversation with the prior person, the prior self, and a conversation with a totally different person? Can you tell me what reason there might be for taking it in the interpretation of Kylie here, that it's actually one person, why would that be the right answer? Because I'll tell you, that's David Lewis's answer. He says the most reasonable answer is that it is one person, but it's two different, what do we call those things? What are the two things having the conversation? Not two different people.
Temporal.
Yes, two different temporal parts of the same object are having the conversation. Now, when you're having a conversation with a totally different person, here's the difference. You do not have memories of being that prior person. Okay, so like if I was having a conversation with myself in 2010, 2021 me today goes back into 2010 and I talk to my younger self from 10 years ago or whatever, I would remember being the younger individual receiving the phone call. I would remember the entire sequence of life that existed between when I was born and when I received that phone call too. When you're talking to somebody else, like I'm talking to you right now, I don't have memories of being you. I don't have memories of your like K through 12 education and your early childhood. So I am not connected with you in terms of psychological continuity. But of course, I am psychologically connected to prior stages of myself because I was that person at that point. That was the temporal part in the sequence of events that forms my life. So it is because of the memorial connection, the memories that I retain from the earlier stages in my sequence of life, that I would say this is the same person, but two different temporal parts of the same person. Now, for all of us that are not time travelers, we only ever have one temporal part of ourselves in the universe at a given time. But if time travel existed, then you'd be looping back into space-time, appearing at a past point in time as your current temporal part. And if that's the case, there would be multiple temporal parts in space at the same time. To show this, I'll put a diagram on the board. Okay. I'm going to show you two space-time diagrams. One that depicts the existence of an ordinary person that never travels back into the past, and another space-time diagram that shows a person that makes that past journey back. So here we have our two spatial axes, y and x. Through them runs the temporal dimension of time. Suppose the person was born in 03, like maybe some of you, and they lived till 2100. Then this could be the graph that shows their life in the stages that pass through that 97-year span. Okay, now for you or me, if this is your timeline, if this is your space-time diagram, then if we were to cut a cross-section through it, like say here it's 2021, that's a little far over to the right, I guess, to really match the numbering, but if this is 2021 and we draw one vertical cross-section through a time slice, there's just going to be one temporal part of you in the universe at that time because you're not looping around to the past or future. But suppose that you were a time traveler and that this technology actually did exist. Then in that case, here would be the graph. So birth back in 03, death way out there in 2100. Now in this case, suppose that it's 2021, this year. Later on this year, they come out with the Apple or the Tesla time machine. And all of a sudden, because of that, you're going to go back and have a little chat with yourself in 2017. So you go back. And now the timeline that shows the space-time diagram of you is like a zigzag street. Now you're back in 2017 and you place this phone call. And you're like, okay, done. Going back to 2021 and living on the rest of your life from there. At this point, if we were to cut a cross-section, say through parts of the time sequence before 2017, we'll just see that there's one temporal part there. But if we draw a cross-section through 2017, how many are there now? Well, there's this temporal part that's later on in the overall sequence of stages, and it's interacting in time and space with the earlier temporal part from the original 2017. So now we have two temporal parts of the same space-time worm that are located on the graph in the same cross-section. And suppose that you get back to 2021 after your little trip to the past, and you realize, wait, no, I left my phone back there. Oops. So I better go back and grab it. So now you go back, take one more second return trip to 2017, and then you're done with that, and you continue your timeline from there. The second trip back would generate yet another temporal part located in the past. So there'd be the individual who made the first trip, talking to the past self, and then the second temporal part of you that made a second trip back. So for each additional time that you go back, there'd be another one of your temporal parts located in space at the same moment. Anyway, that's, he thinks, the best analysis of how to get around the idea that it's not clear whether there are two or one people having the conversation in the time traveler talking to themselves in the past scenario. So let me read here from that, and you can hear his way of putting it. Cordy, two different spatial components. Yes, there are two different spatial components, but the question was just how many people are there? And it's not two different people, even though it looks as though it's completely two different human bodies. They occupy different locations. Correct, yes, they do occupy different locations, absolutely. They're occupying different locations, but they are two different stages of the same person's overall existence or career, if you will, right? So this long zigzag streak shows their sequence of stages progressing from the past to the future. They're all linked together as though like a stretched out accordion of stages that are psychologically continuous. But the current stage that has made the trip back can now interact with the past stage from the previous time point. There's all kinds of movies and science fiction films, right, where a person goes back to the past and they see themselves when they were younger, or go into the future and see themselves when they're older. So why is it incorrect to say two different spatial parts? It's not incorrect to say two different spatial parts, Cordy, but the question I asked wasn't about how many spatial parts there are, but rather how many people there are. How many people are having the conversation? So your answer was not directed toward the question I asked. You said two, and then you justified it by adding the comment, there are two spatial parts. So the interpretation I have to have is you meant to say, in reaction to my question, two people. And the reason I think it is two people is because there are two different spatial positions that the bodies are in. But anyway, I corrected your statement by saying one and the same person always has multiple spatial parts. In this case, they're just separated by even more distance than along one body. Okay. Because after all, the person did occupy that point in space at the earlier stage in their temporal sequence. So it's just holding that position in space that it's always held because all the temporal parts have always existed. Now, as I read from the Lewis, here's what he said. A time traveler who talks to himself on the telephone, perhaps, looks for all the world like two different people talking to each other. It isn't quite right to say that the whole of him is in two places at once, since neither of the two stages involved in the conversation is the whole of him, or even the whole of the part of him that is located at the time of the conversation. What's true is that he, unlike the rest of us, has two complete different stages located at the same time in different places. What reason have I then to regard him as one person and not two? What unites his stages, including the simultaneous ones, into a single person? And he says, I answer that what unites the stages of the time traveler is the same sort of mental or mostly mental connectedness and continuity that unites anyone else. The only difference is that whereas a common person is connected and continuous with respect to external time, the time traveler is connected and continuous only with respect to his own personal time. So there we have his rundown of the time traveler talking to himself in the past hypothesis or scenario. It would be one person, but two temporal parts of the person. Yes.
More of like a general time travel question.
Mm-hmm.
If time travel were ever to be invented, wouldn't we already know? And since it doesn't exist now.
Well, they would be hiding, I guess, right?
Huh?
Maybe the time travelers would hide, and they wouldn't want you to detect them.
Okay.
So they could come in, say, for example, you go to the past, and you're freaked out because you're in 1930 and you're a person from 2021. You just try to blend in, not, reveal yourself or your identity to other people, and the people of 1921 would never be able to detect the difference between you and someone that lived then. So, but anyway, in all honesty, for all practical purposes, we're talking about technology that we will probably never master because the forces that you would have to expose a human body to create a wormhole that would bend space-time so that you could actually access the past points of space-time, it would destroy you. It would be like going into a black hole or something. But what I have heard, if you really want to get into the weird cutting edge of some of this stuff, some people have said that it's not inconceivable to be able to send bits of information into the past. Not people and macroscopic human bodies, but tiny little bits of information that you could deliver back into the past. If that was possible to do, then that would be interesting enough. But anyway, yeah.
Examples of that? Are there like examples?
No, but there are certain particles that are that are known to travel along all these multiple dimensions that are not visible to like human beings. And in one case, I'm forgetting the name of the elementary particle, but there's a physical theory that says that it actually travels along dimensions to the past. So if we were able to somehow send data and bits of information through this, then that's a theoretical possibility, but not as of yet has it been accomplished. Okay, what page is this in the book? Sorry, guys, I'm getting to your comment here. We're looking at, I was reading a quote off of page 468, so thanks, Cordy, for the reference. Thank you. Okay, now, let's see, what's the next possible paradox of the time travel situation? There's also the issue of closed causal loops, closed loops of causation. So here's a weird one. Suppose this scenario were to happen. You receive a phone call today, and you're like, this voice sounds mysteriously familiar to me, but I can't quite place it. But anyway, the person on the phone says this to you. Look, I need you to do something, and it's very important. I can't really quite explain it, but I need you to build something. And here are the instructions for how to build it. So that's what you hear on the phone call. You're on the receiving end of the call, and someone says, build this type of machine. You don't exactly know what they're saying, but you do it. You follow the directions given on the phone, and you make this thing. Now you have it sitting in your garage collecting dust, and you let it sit there for like years. But suppose that 10 years from now, you go back to the garage where this machine that you built based on a mysterious phone call is sitting, and you blow the dust off and you turn it on. And you realize it's actually what? A time machine. So you get into it. And let's suppose that this is 2030. You go back to 2021 when you receive the phone call. And are you following my little narrative? You're going back into 2021 from 2030 using the machine you built. And you're doing so in order to go to 2021 to do what there? What do you think will be our little loop type narration in the next point? So it's a hypothetical for sure. You're getting this call today. The caller tells you how to build something. You build it. You keep it in the garage. In 2030, then you turn it on and you go back to 2021. And you're going back to 2021 so that you could do what?
Tell your younger self to build it.
Yeah, go ahead and put it in the chat. But that's right. Suppose that that's the reason you're going back, because you want to place the phone call, which you initially remember having received when you were the younger self in 2021. So now you're the older person that's delivering the message about how to build this machine to the younger self so that they will build it and have it. Now, this is a loop. Yes, correct. This is a loop. Think about this. Where does the information about how to build the time machine come from in the first place? It seems like it just comes from out of nowhere, and there's no logical analysis as to how the information was derived. If you only look at individual links of the story and not the whole picture, the individual steps kind of make sense. Ask yourself, how does this person know how to build the machine? Well, because they received blueprint instructions from a phone call. That's not too bad. How did the person who makes the phone call know how to deliver the instructions? Because they remember receiving those instructions when they were younger. But where did the information come from itself? It seems like it's just caught up in this loop, and it just derives from nowhere. Is this a theoretical, conceptual impossibility? The idea of closed loops of causation, like so. Well, David Lewis's justification for this, I don't think, this was the one that I thought he did the poorest job of trying to explain away. He basically just sort of takes it on the chin and says, yeah, it's pretty bizarre, isn't it? But that's what would happen. And it's not even that much weirder than other things about reality and the universe that we already accept. So he says, there's other things about the universe that are just as strange as these loops. Okay, like ask yourself, has the universe always existed, or did it pop into reality at some point? Either answer that you give is mind-boggling, because if it's always been here, then it's literally something that has no origin. And if it has an origin, then it's originating from nothing, which is also like kind of impossible to understand. But we know that the universe exists, so we're dealing with something that's quite perplexing and somewhat even paradoxical in and of itself. So he says that since we're already used to such odd and bizarre facts about reality, we shouldn't take these closed causal loops to be any weirder or different than that. And so they're just as much possible, I guess, as the universe's existence is. That's what he says here. About the loop, he says,
This is called a closed causal.
Yeah, a loop of causation. On page 469 at the lower right, he says this. Recall the time traveler who talked to himself. Talk to himself about time travel. And in the course of the conversation, the older self told the younger self how to build a time machine. That information was not available in any other way. The older self knew how because the younger self had been told, and the information had been preserved by the causal processes that constitute memory. The younger self knew after the conversation because the older self had told them. But where did the information come from in the first place, and why did the whole affair happen? There's simply no answer. The parts of the loop can be explained, but the whole thing cannot. Strange, but not impossible. And then he says, and it's not much different from other inexplicable things that we're already used to. Almost everyone agrees that God, or the Big Bang, or the entire infinite past of the universe is unexplainable and uncaused. So if these things are possible, then why shouldn't we also say it is possible for the bizarre causal loops to arise within time travel? So anyway, that's his way of reporting against the another possible paradox, like how could these loops possibly exist, which would be a consequence of some time travel situations. Okay, and then there's one more, and this last one is, I think, it's the most interesting in a lot of ways. It's the most famous part of this paper. The scenario given here is the one that's most often discussed in the years since. So what we're going to talk about now is the question of, could a person change the past if they were able to access the past through time travel? Would a person be able to alter events and make them different from how they were initially? To make us have a clear example to think of, he tells us about this possible situation. So consider the case of Tim. I don't know if Tim is like a pun, like Tim Time, but whatever, it's Tim. And I'm going to tell you about Mr. Tim. Tim is a man who hates his grandfather. Like, he deeply hates this grandfather with a burning passion, true hatred. And what he wants to really do is to kill his grandfather. But there's a problem. The grandfather is already dead. He's been dead for a while. You'd think that Tim would let it go, but it's not enough for him. He says, I'm not satisfied just with the fact that my grandfather is dead. He died of natural causes at an old age. I would like to actually kill him before that. I would like it to be that I caused his death through homicide because I hate him so much. So anyway, Tim has inherited a lot of wealth from this grandfather, ironically, and he chooses to use all of that to build a time machine. So he's going to take this time machine built from the grandfather's inherited wealth, and he's going to take a trip back to 1921, 100 years ago from now, back to when the grandfather was in his youth and in his prime. And what he's going to try and do when he goes back to 1921 is to try and kill the grandfather and assassinate him. But there are some little puzzles and problems with the scenario here, because if he actually were to kill his grandfather in 1921, then that would prevent the grandfather from having ever conceived one of the parents of Tim. Okay, because like Tim was obviously born, one of his two parents is a child of the grandfather, and he's trying to kill the grandfather at a point in time prior to this man ever having conceived the parent of Tim. So obviously that would eliminate the condition for his own birth. Therefore, the question is asked. When Tim, let's suppose, goes back to that year, question, can Tim kill the grandfather? Yes or no? That's our new little puzzling question. Can Tim succeed in killing his grandfather in 1921? Now, the reason that Lewis calls attention to that question is because he says the answering of the question leads us in a kind of into a paradox, because it seems justifiable to say that yes, he can, but also no, he can't. And he tries to give some discussion of the reasoning behind either answer. So let's try and do that ourselves. Tell me, any of you, why do you think someone might say that the answer to this question is no? Why do you think someone, in other words, might claim that it is not even possible for him to succeed, given the scenario that I've explained to you? What reason would you say that some argue it's not possible? Just think of like this science fictional scenario and tell me why, according to it, it does not seem possible. Okay, Kylie, you say many books, movies try to apply this, and then the character who tried to do the killing disappears. Right, Kylie, but I'm asking you though, forget the movies. What's your intuition? Or setting aside your own personal feeling on it, can you tell me why you think someone would say it is not possible? It's not possible. Even if he goes to the past, he can't eliminate his grandfather.
Because it already like happened, basically.
Okay, yeah, leave it in the chat too, but the reasoning would have to be, if you follow the discussion, that it's not possible because if he succeeded somehow, then that would mean that he himself would have never been born. But obviously, you have to have been born to mount a successful assassination attempt on somebody. So, how could it be consistent for his grandfather to have died before ever parenting this parent of Tim, and yet Tim still to have been born to go back to the past? So, it seems like that would be a contradiction and therefore impossible. Once a person's been born, it does not seem possible for them to no longer exist. As an example, think of your own existence. I mean, you exist. I'm glad you exist, and there you are. But there's no way that we can edit that out of reality at this point. We can't say, no, you never were born. Sorry, but let's make that not have happened. It has happened, and so things could happen to you now, but we can't annul the fact that you were born in the first place. And so the same, we would argue, is true of Tim. Try as he might, therefore, he's bound to fail in this attempt because any success in this way would have annihilated the condition of his own birth, which would have made it impossible for him to even go to the past in the first place, clearly. So one way of looking at it is that there would be an inconsistent contradiction to the timeline of history if the grandfather both did and did not survive this assassination attempt to give rise to the parent of Tim. On the other hand, though, Lewis says that some might have a different reaction, kind of like the one of Kylie, but I don't know if it's fair to associate it with your comments. So let me just put it this way. Some would say that he can't, just because he's there and because he has, a rifle and he's trained up and he's full of motivation to do it. So why shouldn't he be able to do it if he's just in the position to do it? Well, as Lewis sees it, the right answer is the first one, that in fact he will not be able to succeed because once again that would contradict the events of history that did in fact eventuate with his own birth. But that does not mean that he cannot make a failed attempt. So what Lewis thinks would happen is that if Mr. Tim goes into the past with this mission in mind, he's bound to fail, but he'll fail for some kind of mundane reason. Like at the last moment, the gun will jam, or when he fires the shot, his grandfather will reach down to pick up the newspaper and he'll miss, and then he won't get another clear shot. Or it'll be a case of mistaken identity, and he, shoots someone else that he thought was his grandfather and kills that person, but it actually didn't turn out to be the real grandfather, therefore preserving the possibility of his own birth. But whatever happens, we won't see a successful attempt on the grandfather's life. Otherwise, it would be the case that the Tim both did exist, but also was prevented from having existed, which does not make sense. But, and this is the sort of final point of this whole topical discussion of time, despite all of that we can somehow, make sense of the claim that he could not succeed, there's something fundamentally interesting and deep about the whole scenario here that doesn't necessarily have to do with time travel. So I want to close our discussions of time, metaphysics of time, and time travel by trying to make this a little bit more relatable for you. He says that the ambiguity in answering this question has to do with two different interpretations of the word can. So he says the single word can, like what you can or cannot do, can be understood in two possible ways. So there's two interpretations of the word can. Okay, so there is the narrower interpretation and the more broad interpretation. So the narrow interpretation of the word can, and then the broad. So the narrow sense of the word is this. It means what a person can do according to a more narrow range of factors, a more limited, narrow range of factors about them. So what a person is able to do given a narrower set of facts. Okay, and then the broad sense of the word is just the same with the word broader taking the place of narrower. So what a person is able to do given a broader set of facts. So when we talk about what a person can do, we are sometimes speaking in one of these senses and not the other one. And this helps to explain away the appearance of a paradox in the hypothetical of Tim. Let me explain this to you through a certain example. I'm going to ask a question to you that, let me just hear your most common sense, natural answer. If I was to ask you, members of this class, can you speak Russian? Can you speak Russian? What would be your answer? Tell me, can you? I don't know, only you know. So you have to tell me, can you speak Russian? This is not the hardest question I've asked you, I think. Well, actually, it is going to get a little tricky in a minute, but at least at this level, common sense tells you, I mean, what would you say? Can you speak Russian? Let me know.
I can't.
Okay, good. Well, I'm going to let people get a moment here because I think there's just a little delay. Yeah, okay, so hi. You cannot speak Russian, Kylie. Zachary, you also say no. Okay, good. Now, I'm used the example of Russian because I know that it's not the most common language for American student to take on. We have other second languages that are more popular, I guess, in our country. So probably you're saying no because you've never yet studied it. You don't know the vocabulary. You don't know the grammar. But now I'm going to ask you that question in a slightly different way, and you'll see that the answer is different. What if I ask this? In comparison to a house cat, can you speak Russian? Like if I compare you against the average house cat, can you speak Russian by means of comparing yourself to that other kind of species? What would be your answer here? I mean, I know you haven't learned it yet, sure. But like, can you, in theory, speak Russian in the sense that like a cat cannot ever speak Russian? Can you in that sense? By comparison to another animal that doesn't even have human language. What do you think is the answer, or what would you say? Yeah, so there you go, Kylie. You are able to learn and apply concepts of Russian compared to a cat. So essentially, long story short, Kylie, the answer is yes. You can speak Russian if what I'm asking you is, you versus a cat. Can you and it can't? Yes, the answer is yes. So now, when you say that you can, in comparison to a so-called cat, what you mean is not that you're currently able to, but that it's theoretically possible because you're a human being and you have the ability to learn a new language if you really want to take on a course of study with it and take time to master it, right? In the same sense that a baby that's born today cannot speak any language, but it can speak language if you just give it time and the right kind of environmental support. Okay, so it looks like we kind of gave two different answers, eh? That you can't, but also that you can. And now this is bringing into the discussion these two different senses of the one word can. So sometimes when we talk about what a person can do, we're talking about the big picture, like what you can do if we look at all relevant factors. In the big picture, what a person can or can't do, that's the broad sense. But when we narrow it down to just more specific facts, and we say what you can or can't do with regard to those more specific, narrower set of facts, that's the narrow sense of the word can. So question then, guys. In which of the two senses of the word can you, in principle, speak Russian? In the big picture sense or in the narrow tunnel vision sense? Let me know. In which sense of the word can you, at least, unlike a cat, speak Russian? Which sense?
Broad.
The broad sense. Is that clear enough? It's in the big picture sense. Very good. Yes, Kylie and Sydney. So, but in the narrow sense of the word, if we just narrow our focus to what you've already learned and what your current skills and abilities are, then we would say, no, you can't speak it. Like you can't just start talking right now. In the same sense, I'm a big runner, okay, and I have a goal of eventually maybe getting to the 5-minute mile. That's a big milestone I've always wanted. I'm not there yet. Last year I got a 5:21 mile, and that was my best time trial of 2020. But I'm still, 21 seconds off. Anyway, when I look at that goal, I say to myself, I can run a 5-minute mile, but I'm a little off of my peak training right now. So at the current moment, it's like I can't. But if I work hard enough and I really focus on it and dedicate myself to it, I think that I can. So in a broad, big picture sense, I think I can. But where I'm at right now with my fitness, it's like I can't. So that's the difference between these two senses of the word. Bringing it back to our question about Mr. Tim then. When we say that he cannot kill his grandfather, Are we looking at the big picture there when we say that he can't? Yes, because we're saying that he cannot when you look at the full scope of his existence. The fact that he was born, the fact that his grandfather survives to conceive his parent. When you look at the big picture of overall history, we understand that Tim can't not succeed. So in the broad sense of the word, he can't. But in the narrow sense of the word, it looks like he can. When you just zero in on the fact that he's there with a gun pointed at someone and it designs on killing them, if you just look at that little piece of information and you don't look at the bigger picture, it looks like he can. So in a way, we kind of have it both ways. In the big ultimate sense, he can't do anything differently to change the events. But if we just ignore the fact that, he eventually was born, it can make it look as though he's able to. Now, here's where I think it's really trippy and a little more personal for us. You're a student and you study these topics on time travel that I'm assigning you. And I know some of you are probably sitting back thinking like, what the hell? This is so weird. This has nothing to do with anything. We'll never time travel. Why am I learning this? Well, it's because you want to be interested in the metaphysical depth of your existence as a human being in the universe, okay? So here's the question. I have a question for you based on this space-time theory. Right now you're watching this lecture, and I know that's what's happening because you're here with me. Question, could you have not been at this lecture today? Do you think it was possible that you could have not attended? Okay, well, let's take it slow. One way of looking at it, let me hear from any of you guys. Well, yes, based on the space-time theory, the question is, could you have missed lecture today? Now, an ordinary person would hear that question and they would think automatically, of course I could have missed it. I could have slept through it. Some people are not here today, and when you guys watch it later, hopefully you'll start attending live again. But sometimes, you're going to think, well, of course I could have missed it. I might have overslept. I might have chose not to watch it. Maybe I would have had a computer problem or an internet connection issue. So many different things could have happened where I wouldn't have been watching this lecture. But if the space-time theory is correct, then actually the answer is no, there's no way that you could not have been at this lecture. Now, Cordy or Sydney or anyone who has that idea, tell me why it is that the answer would be no, you couldn't have missed lecture today if the space-time theory is correct. How come you could not have possibly been somewhere else right now? You say no, right, but let's, explain the answer to us. Why is it that you could not have possibly missed lecture if the space-time theory is correct?
Because everything was already, I don't know how to say it, because everything already happened, basically. Everything already exists.
All the temporal parts all exist. The future and past ones also do. So the temporal part of you that you're experiencing right now in your sequence of life stages has already been there, has always been there.
Right,
and so
Wednesday, this was already happening.
Yeah, so there's no possibility for counterfactual actions according to the space-time theory. All the actions are fully set out in the whole manifold of space and time. And so that means that everything you do is part of your destiny and you're not able to ever do otherwise. So when you look at the time travel scenario and you say, hey, Tim can't possibly succeed in this assassination attempt because we know how the story ends. We know it ends with him being born later. So whatever happens can't contradict that outcome. You're like Tim then, except you're not a time traveler. You're just a person living in space-time. And if that is correct, then just as much as Tim, he can't change the past, you can't change the present, and you can't change the future either. Because according to this, there's no such thing as an open future. It's just as closed as the past. When you look at your past, you understand that. You say, I can never do that again. I can never redo it. It's over. There's nothing I can do to undo the past. You'd have to think about the future and the present in the same way if you agree with the space-time theory, because there's nothing you can do to undo the future events either. They're bound to happen, and they're all set out in the actual sequence of space-time events.
But we still have to live them.
You do have to still live them and experience them, but you're not the one who's able to do otherwise. So one thing I think is interesting as a professor of all this topic and material is earlier in the semester when I tell you guys about the cosmological argument and I say, here's what are contingent and necessary truths. Contingent truths are things that are true, but they could have been false. And I say, give me examples. And people are sometimes a little stumped, but then they start to understand, okay, like the outcome of a sporting match, it might not have gone that way if the plays were different. But I noticed that in some cases, there's a little intellectual resistance from some students. They're like, isn't that too weird, though, to say that there's things that could have happened otherwise? I mean, what is this could have happened otherwise? It's just the actual world. So I find that the first intuition that students have there is to say there's no contingent truths. Everything just happens, and there's no possible worlds where they happen differently. But now I tell you that there is no such thing as possibility. And now you're like, wait, there have to be these counterfactuals. There have to be alternatives to the actual events that happen. But ask yourself, what is a counterfactual? What is doing something otherwise? You never do anything that's contrary to fact. The only things you ever do are the actual things. So look, can I demonstrate for you my free will with this marker? I'm telling you I'm going to take the cap off. I'm changing my mind. I'm not going to. Well, yes, I know I'm not. Putting it down. Actually, okay, I decided to do it. Now, was that free? Was this marker cap supposed to stay on there and I made a decision to do something that wasn't going to have happened already? You don't have access to a different counterfactual experience where the marker cap did stay on. So we can speculate and talk about in our head about the alternative actions that could be taken, but there's only ever one action that is taken, and it's the actual action. So it's kind of interesting, right? What do you think is more realistic, to say that there is possibility or that there's no such thing as possibility? I find that people are sometimes pressed and they like both ideas, but when you think through the implications of either one, they're a little weird and even disturbing. You had a comment?
I was just gonna say, like, what about like parallel universes?
Okay, well, in quantum physics, there's some discussion in the no collapse version of the theory of there being like all these different quantum branches of reality where the counterfactual action would have been taken or play out. But even if that is so, the other counterparts of you that exist in the other quantum branches are not necessarily identical with the individual in this branch. How are they connected to each other? Then you get into counterpart theory in possible world semantics, which is very technical, but there are arguments about that stuff. Yes. Other people don't believe in the no collapse theory. Some people believe in what's called the collapse theory, which holds that there are not these other counterfactuals. But to account for that, we have to assume that elementary particles take like infinite paths before they collapse into one particular vector, which has also got its own conceptual difficulties. I think the no collapse theory is more elegant, but that takes us afield into science and quantum physics. So anyway, guys, the reason I brought up this last point about like, could you have not been in class today, is to make you realize that the deeper metaphysical significance of thinking about the time travel issues is not necessarily because we're going to have time travel or that that's a realistic prospect. It's to think about what the physical theories imply for even everyday objects and people in space-time. And if it is true, then you have a destiny that you're bound to see experienced. And I just wish you good luck, because I guess you'll need it if this theory is true, since there's no real agency in a sense. There's just the illusion of it. Huh?
We wouldn't need luck because it's already gonna happen.
Well, I hope the universe is in your favor. It's sort of like hoping for providence from God or whatever, you know? Why would you need good luck? Well, because I guess you're powerless to change the order of the events. So I hope that your events lying ahead of you in your temporal sequence are good events. Because if they're not, nothing can happen to change that. Well, okay, Cordy, very, very clever and sharp point. That would imply probability. I guess I speak loosely then, and as an everyday citizen when I say luck. Clearly, yes, there is a detailed philosophical analysis of luck that makes reference to the concept of possibilities, and therefore you may be catching me in a slight contradiction. But anyway, we've reached the end of today's meeting. So on Monday, guys, we're going to start with another topic. We're finished with time for now. And the next topic is going to be about the philosophy of mind, which is going to take us back to Descartes again and his 6 meditations. So try to read that for Monday's meeting, and we'll spend all the time on that. I'll talk to you also about the paper prompts for a little while at the top of the meeting on Monday, and I'll distribute them later today, probably during the office hours. The other thing I noticed is that some of our numbers for attendance today were a little low. And, I just hope that you enjoy the class and that you want to attend just out of your own love of philosophy. So please keep coming back. To those people that are not watching today, I would love to see you back next week. And it's going to be just to your benefit to do that. So do yourself a favor and come back. All right, guys. Is everything good? Let me know, and then I'll close the stream. Wishing you guys a good weekend. I always like to wait to get the goodbye. I don't want to close it off prematurely. So let me know. Okay, perfect. Thanks, Sebastian, Cordy, everybody that's here. I do appreciate your attendance and your patience with some difficult topics. It's philosophy, though. I don't know what you thought it would be. It's philosophy. This is how it is. All right, guys, thanks a lot. Have a great weekend. I'll see you soon.